Welcome to our Class of 2021 GLE or Global Languages Endorsement Seal of Biliteracy Results and Impact webinar. We're glad you're here with us today to share information about our results this year, but also to learn more about our Seal of Biliteracy and Seals of Biliteracy in general. Here's our agenda on the screen. As you see, we have quite a lot to share with you, starting with a welcome and introductions, an overview of our Class of 2021 GLE data, a national and post-secondary perspective on the Seal of Biliteracy, resources for implementing North Carolina's Global Languages Endorsement or GLE, a district perspective on students earning the GLE in Seal of Biliteracy, and then a wrap-up and reminders. With that, I'm going to hand things over to Stacy Daniel to get us started for today.
All right, well, again, welcome. As Anne-Marie said, I'm Stacy Daniel. I currently serve as the section chief for ELA and Languages, and I have the privilege of working with and supporting the DPI GLE team. We have the honor of two presenters from the field joining us today, which we're really excited about. Dr. Kristin Gavin, who is the Associate Professor and Program Director of World Language Education at UNC-Charlotte, will be with us. And we also have Melissa Perez, who serves Durham Public Schools as the K-12 Cultural and Linguistic Development Specialist. I'm also joined by the two members of the GLE team today, and I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Ivana Manthor-Anderson, one of the ESL Title III consultants, also a co-lead for GLI and co-lead for the GLE. We're so glad to have you guys with us today.
And I'm Anne-Marie Gunter, the World Languages Consultant at the Department of Public Instruction. And as Ivana noted, I also am the co-lead on our DLI work and the GLE.
Great. And Anne-Marie and Ivana, along with our guest speakers, have really planned a wonderful session for you this afternoon. But before we get started, we actually want to just take care of some housekeeping. So if you've never used WebEx before, your window should look like this. So if you hover over your screen or if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a menu where you can access the chat, and you'll also be able to access the polls that Anne-Marie and Ivana will be using throughout the presentation today. So anytime you want to access the chat, ask questions, answer a poll, it'll be through that window and through that panel. So let's go ahead and get started. To really bring everyone's voices to the table and start connecting to the work that we have ahead or the information we'll be sharing during this time together, we'd love to see what motivated you to participate in this webinar today. So a poll, I believe, should pop up in your WebEx panel where you can check all of the answers that apply. So take a moment to just take a look at those answers and that question. What motivated you to join us today? So just a few more seconds to go ahead and check all the answers that apply. All right, so it looks like the majority of us kind of selected A, C, and D, with a few of us selecting B, even less selecting E. That's okay. So we're hoping that you're going to get all of your answers to your questions that you might have. Of course, you'll be getting information about the GLE today, and then also you'll also be hearing from some of our colleagues in the field. So in addition to seeing what motivated you to join us, we'd also love to see where you're joining us from. So if you would, I think this is also going to be another poll, select the region in North Carolina where you're located. And if you're joining us maybe from outside the state, please definitely let us know. We really would love to see who's here. Okay, well, that's interesting. So we've got maybe one or two people that have joined us from outside of North Carolina, which is great. Welcome. And then, of course, we've got a lot of us joining from the central part of the state. And then we've got, of course, some from the southeast, from the southwest. So welcome. We're excited that you chose to spend the next hour or so with us. And regardless of whether your district or your school has graduates that earn the GLE team and the guest speakers will be sharing a wealth of information with you today that can be shared locally. So we hope that you'll be able to walk away with something that you can definitely use in your districts or your schools after our time together. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Anne Marie, who's actually going to start us off with an overview of the class of 2021's GLE data.
Great. Thanks so much, Stacy. One of the things that we do every year is to share what our current data is for our last graduating class for our GLE. So that's what I'm going to start off sharing today, and then Ivana is going to share a few details as well about that. Our Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE, is one of our 5 diploma endorsements. It became available beginning with the class of 2015, so we are now at about 6 or 7 years of implementing our Seal of Biliteracy, or SOBL, as we use the acronym nationally. There are 5 total high school diploma endorsements that graduating seniors can earn, in addition to just their diploma. They need to meet requirements for each of these, and so we're going to talk about what the requirements are for our Seal of Biliteracy to make sure everyone's familiar with that. If you need a reference, though, our State Board of Education, or SBE policy called GRAD 007 is the one that talks about our high school diploma endorsements in North Carolina. The purpose of the GLE is to provide a way for students to show their multiliteracy in English and at least one world language. It is a seal of biliteracy, so of course English and a world language are paired. And in North Carolina, students can also show proficiency in more than one world language. They can actually earn their GLE and have as many world languages as they want based on how they qualify for them, the different options that they use to meet those requirements. Our endorsement in North Carolina is automatically added to the student transcript in PowerSchool, and it specifically has that the student has earned their GLE, their Seal of Biliteracy. It lists the world language or world languages that they earned them in, and the proficiency level that they have established in that language. Our minimum is intermediate low proficiency, but of course there are students who earn a higher level of proficiency on their GLE. Our GLE requirements are posted here, as you see, at this bit.ly link. We've just recently moved our information about the GLE over to the DPI website under the Global Education Recognitions. So let's take a moment and go out there if you would like, but what you will see when you get there is simply the requirements for English and world languages. For English, of course, the students have to meet the high school English language arts requirements by earning an unweighted 2.5 GPA or higher in the required 4 English courses that they take. If a student is still an English learner at the high school level, they complete the English language arts course requirement above and then also reach the level 3 or developing level of proficiency on the scale in all 4 domains in our recent state identified English language proficiency test. In world languages, students have to establish intermediate low proficiency or higher in a world language. And they have 3 different ways they can choose from to do that. They only have to do one of these options. They can complete 4 levels of the same language with an unweighted 2.5 GPA or higher, very similar, of course, to the English requirement. One thing to be aware of for what we call the course completion requirement like this is that the automated process in PowerSchool will search for a level 4 world language course or higher to meet this requirement. So we've had questions before about which 4 courses it has to be. It just has to be the level 4 or higher course in world language. Another option for students to show their proficiency in world languages is to take an exam from the NCDPI approved external assessment list and achieve a minimum language proficiency score of intermediate low or above. And finally, another option for students for the world languages requirement is to use the credit by demonstrated mastery policy, or CDM, that you might have heard about to establish intermediate low proficiency or higher. So that's the basics. And you see that if you go out to our Seal of Biliteracy page, you have links to all of the things that list there. On the right, we also have a picture of how that page looked for our GLE requirements before we moved it over to the DPI website. So some of you may remember that, but we still have all the same requirements. I'm going to go quickly out to that website just so you can see how it lays out. This is part of our Global Education Recognitions, the Seal of Biliteracy, and you can see that it's first for the student recognition. Just click on that, and then you can scroll down and see all the things we just showed on the screen related to the policy requirements. All right, well, here it is. Let's look at our GLE data for the class of 2021 that just graduated last spring. We had over 5,000 graduates across North Carolina who earned the GLE, our state seal of biliteracy, 5,018 to be exact. One thing to know is that some graduates did earn their seal of biliteracy in 2 or more world languages, but on average, it's usually one student earning the seal of biliteracy for one language. 5,018 graduates makes up 4.8% of the class of 2021 who earned this recognition, and then of course with it on their transcripts hopefully went on to higher education or some sort of post-secondary training or career plan where they can show their proficiency and use their language skills. This also represents 70% of our districts. 81 out of 115 districts in North Carolina had graduates who had GLEs. And likewise, this is 50% of charter schools. Our data showed us that 40 out of the 70 charter schools that have graduating classes, or a high school that has graduating classes, had students who earned a GLE. In comparison to the class of 2019 and the class of 2020, these numbers did decrease a little bit for the class of 2021. This is likely due to the challenges of the pandemic, and we'll be taking a closer look at some of these numbers later on to get you to reflect on what you can tell from what's been posted for your district or charter school and how you might want to use that information going forward. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ivana.
Thank you. So you may be asking, what languages are these students actually receiving the GLE in? And we have over 10 languages each year that they are received in. So on the right side, you can see what those languages are in alphabetical order, of course. Some people are surprised when they see American Sign Language, but that has always been part of our GLE. One of the things we'll point out at the very bottom is Ukrainian, which is our newest language, and this is the first time that we have had it on our GLE list. Please know that some of these languages, such as Ukrainian, are languages that are not taught in our schools. So we have our heritage language speakers that are able to get this GLE. And so we're very excited to have a new language listed. And as you can see here, a number of languages that are not taught in the schools and a number that are. We also have other classical and modern languages. Sometimes it's not clear based on the information in PowerSchool what language the GLE was actually earned in. And so if you happen to be someone who has that data in your district, please let us know so that we can update our data at the state, because our data is only as clean as what comes through PowerSchool. So a few more things on the next slide about PowerSchool. So as Anne-Marie said, the data is automated in PowerSchool. So as we receive that information, we see who has earned those credits, and we know that they're going to be generated for the diplomas. Anne-Marie explained about the different ways that you can actually earn the world languages side of the GLE. And we're excited to see that each of these different options are being used, although course completion is still the major way. So 95% of our GLE earners for 2021 did use the course completion method. We had 4% using the credit by demonstrated mastery and 1% using the external exams. So if you are interested, on the website, there is a list of the exams that are approved for use for the GLE in North Carolina. We also are very excited that there are a number of students who received a higher proficiency level than the minimum of intermediate low. One of them being Ukrainian, our newest language this year, along with Russian and Spanish. So it's very exciting to see that even though we don't have specific levels of the GLE, that the GLE is earned at the intermediate low level, but the transcript will show when a higher level is completed. So you've heard a lot of information coming at you. So we want to get a little feedback from you. Which of this GLE data was most interesting from your perspective? And we're going to say pick two, because today is 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Lots of twos today. So what caught your interest the most? Was it the fact that we have over 5,000 graduates? Maybe looking at the number of districts and charters that the GLE's earners come from? What about the percentages of districts and charters? How about those three options for the world languages? Maybe the list of the GLE languages, or maybe something else. So you have the poll up on your screen. You can pick more than two if you really want to, but let us know what has been most interesting for you so far in the information that we've been able to share. I know we have a small group today, so I will let the person running the poll decide when we think we have enough time and close out our poll. All right, I see our poll has been closed out. So we have a tie at 50% for two different ones, the over 5,000 graduates and the list of the GLE languages. So it's always interesting to me to see what those languages are for the year, and especially exciting when we have new languages that have been added. For the percentages of districts, we had 33% that found that quite interesting, and then 17% on how the three options can be used in order to qualify for the GLE. Fantastic. Thank you for participating in our survey. So now it is my honor to turn it over to Kristin Gavin. Dr. Davin is an associate professor and program director of world language education at UNC-Charlotte. She's also one of the better known researchers working with the Seal of Biliteracy. And so we're very excited to have her right here in North Carolina and to have her with us today. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm so excited to be here to speak with you all today about something I'm really passionate about, which is the Seal of Biliteracy. So if we go to the next slide, what you'll see is all the states that have a Seal of Biliteracy already approved. So this started in California. It originated to counteract deficit views of students who were bilingual and biliterate, to change, English only ideologies that were present in the state at that time with the English only laws that were restricting bilingual education. And once other states heard about it, they wanted to have a similar policy. And so it's really exciting because it's one of the first, policies that we've had in the United States that promotes multilingualism and bilingual education. So we currently have seals of biliteracy in 45 states in the District of Columbia, but you can see here on this map that the remaining states either have a policy under consideration or in its early stages. So if we go to the next slide, what we see are some things that I've found in the research that I've done with my colleague Amy Heineke and Charlotte Hancock and Corina Krowski about why the Seal of Biliteracy is so important. So when you first heard about it, you might have thought, okay, so an emblem on the diploma or a notation on the transcript that says the student's bilingual and biliterate. Like, what's the big deal? What does that mean? So we wanted to find out, what does that mean? So we talked to different research studies, talked to students, talked to teachers, talked to administrators, and some of the things that we found were that one, this policy is really motivating to students. It really motivates them to continue with language study. So a lot of kids have this idea in mind that, oh, I just need to take 2 years of world language in high school because that's what colleges need, and then I'm done, and then I'm out of here, right? But when students find out about this Seal of Biliteracy, which is called the Global Languages Endorsement in North Carolina, they might be more motivated to stay in world language. And so what we're seeing is that enrollment in world language programs in the context that we've studied is going up because more students want, this Global Languages Endorsement. We've also found, you heard earlier, for example, that there was a student who had earned a Seal of Biliteracy in Ukrainian, and that there were other students who had earned seals of biliteracy in languages not taught in our schools. And when you hear that, that often indicates that that student took some sort of approved language assessment. For some languages, it might be the Apple test. For others, it might be the stamp. They might have gone through a different process, but that means that they earned that seal in something other than seat time. And so when programs administer those assessments, they get this really great assessment data back. They can see how their students are scoring, in the 3 modes of communication or the 4 domains of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And that's really powerful for a teacher, because if I see that my students are consistently scoring well in speaking and listening, for example, but aren't scoring as well in writing, then I know where I need to focus. So that's another really powerful factor of the Seal of Biliteracy. Other research has found that having this policy in place and really recognizing and applauding the students who earn it instills pride in students' home language and culture. So for our heritage language learners, I recently did some focus groups with students who spoke languages like Somali, Hmong, Karen, and asked them, what the Seal of Biliteracy meant to them. And they said for many of them, it was the first time that they ever felt that their home language was recognized in school, and that it was really refreshing to be able to take a test in their home language and see, how well they scored in their home language. And their parents were really excited about it, and they were really excited about it, and their grandparents were really excited. So this policy can really instill pride in students' home language and culture. And it also has the potential to pave more equitable pathways to college access. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but more and more colleges and universities are awarding credit to students who earned a Seal of Biliteracy. And for a lot of the students who earn the seal, a lot of students who might be labeled by the school as English learners, or might have previously been labeled by the school as English learners, they might not have had access to the advanced placement courses or the college credit courses because maybe their schedules were dominated by English classes, right? And so for these students to be able to get college credit in a home language can really make college more accessible and more affordable. So let's go to the next slide. I have a little video on this next slide. Ivana or Anne Marie, if you don't mind hitting play on this, it's just a quick 1 minute about what the Seal of Biliteracy means to these students. Quick 2 minutes. Oh, I don't hear the volume.
Okay, give me just a second. Let's go ahead and make sure we've got the video hooked up so we can all listen to it.
Okay.
I'm going to put it right now into the chat box as well. You'll notice I've been putting some things in there that we can all access the resources and things we talk about here. Let me go ahead and make sure that we have added this in as a video.
And if we can't get it to play, that's okay. You all can copy that link and watch it later. I really like it because it's the students' voices on what the Seal of Biliteracy meant to them, and you can see how it's much more than just, an emblem on a diploma. Um, and I also think that that video, it's obviously been done professionally, but it shows you a great example of how we can promote the Seal of Biliteracy and make sure that everyone knows about it. Because sometimes I'll talk to students who are in level 4 or AP and ask them, oh, you're probably, earning a Seal of Biliteracy. And they say to me, what's that? What does that mean? They don't even know that they're earning it. So anything you can do to promote the policy through by inviting students back in to talk about it, creating videos like the one that is in the chat box. Oh, good. I see someone wrote that it's working, so that's good. And I see Fatima's here. Hi. So that's exciting. So yeah, take a look at that. And Anne Marie, if we can't get it to work, that's okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think WebEx has updated and changed some functions, so I cannot get it to where it would take the YouTube link. However,
Let's keep going.
we did put it in the chat, so you can watch it when you get a chance.
Yeah, and if you just kind of go into YouTube and play around with terms like Seal of Biliteracy, you'll find a lot of great videos that school districts and students even have made talking about what it means to them, and great promotional videos and informational videos. So if we go back to sharing the screen and go back to the PowerPoint, I'll give you, a little bit more of the perspective from the research. All right, here we are. Amy Heineke and I did a study where we asked students, we had big focus groups and asked students, why did you decide to take this assessment to earn a Seal of Biliteracy? Because in a lot of states, which you'll see in a minute, you cannot get a Seal of Biliteracy through a minimum GPA in a course of study. You instead have to take one of those language assessments. And a lot of times those are after school or on a Saturday or maybe considered like a field trip in school. And so we asked students, what made you decide to do this? Why did you want a Seal of Biliteracy? And when we asked our linguistically diverse students, our heritage language learners who learned another language at home, they said things like future career use. They wanted that additional seal on their transcript to make them more attractive in the college process, future employment opportunities, college credit, appreciation of cultural diversity, all sorts of reasons. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that the reasons for the English dominant students, or the ones who learned a world language in school, were pretty similar for the most part. Future employment, future career, college credit, the additional seal on the transcript, ability to travel abroad. So a lot of the reasons overlapped between the two groups, but the students definitely, were very, very much interested in having this proof of their biliteracy. So on the next slide, what we see is a little bit more background information. So you've got the broader perspective now, kind of what it looks like in North Carolina in terms of how many students are getting it. You have a bit of an idea of why this is important, why it matters. But to give you a little bit more background information, I said earlier that it originated in California and then other states adopted the seal. This was such a cool grassroots movement in that it was different language organizations or sometimes groups of individuals who found out about the seal in each state, and helped get it passed as policy. Without any federal funding. So because it was grassroots, the different states could kind of shape the policy in ways that made the most sense for their context. And as a result, the Seal of Biliteracy differs a little bit from state to state. Some states have various tiers. So for example, if I reach intermediate low in my world language, then I might get a silver seal. If I reach intermediate mid, then I might get a gold. So you can as that example shows too, the minimum required proficiency level in world language varies. Here in North Carolina, it's set at intermediate low on the actful proficiency scale, and I have a picture of that in a future slide, so we'll get there in a minute. But in other states, it's intermediate mid or intermediate high even. The method of demonstrating world language proficiency varies. So I told you here in North Carolina, or Anne-Marie told you earlier, there are 3 different ways you can demonstrate your proficiency. And in other states that there's various ways too. The most common form of assessment is by taking a language test. The method of demonstrating English proficiency varies, and the types of schools that are allowed to get a state seal of biliteracy also varies. There's now 13 states that permit independent or private schools students to earn a state seal of biliteracy, and that number is growing each year, so that's kind of exciting. On the next slide, what we see are some just a quick example of the minimum level of proficiency required in different states, just so you have a good idea of what this looks like. If you're not familiar with these levels, intermediate low is considered kind of the survive and cope level. You can kind of, you can create with language a little bit, string words around to create sentences and kind of fulfill your basic needs. Advanced low at the bottom down here, that's the level required by most states for world language teachers. So that means you can speak, in different time frames, in paragraph form to a certain extent. So you see that there's kind of a wide variation in the minimum levels of proficiency. On the next slide, what we see are the evidence of world language proficiency required by different states. So 6 states accept, a minimum GPA in a course of study, with North Carolina being one of those states. The majority of states require a score on an approved assessment, like the STAMP or Apple test. Those are typically $20 per student. A lot of schools and districts will find a way to cover that cost for students, but in some places, students have to pay for it themselves. For there are some languages for which there is not an affordable and practical assessment of the 4 domains of reading, writing, listening, and speaking, but there might be an assessment of productive skills only, so speaking and writing. So for example, STAMP's formerly called the World Speak assessment, and ACTFL has a version 2. So there are 17 states where if there is not an assessment of all 4 skills available, you can just assess the productive skills, and North Carolina is one of those states too. And then 28 states have an alternative assessment process. So let's say that I have a student who speaks Hmong, for example, and STAMP and Apple, for example, aren't available in that language, or a language like Cherokee. Then certain states have an alternative assessment process, like a portfolio or something like that, that students can turn in. On the next slide, what we see, evidence of English proficiency varies. Some states just say, if you graduate from high school, if you meet our graduation requirements, we consider you proficient in English. Some have a passing score on an English language arts assessment, minimum GPA in a course of study, or score on an English proficiency assessment, like an Apple or STAMP or English. On the next slide, this is kind of interesting. So this chart shows you the percentage of graduates who earned a seal of biliteracy back when we first collected these data in 2015-2016 school year, and then compared to the 2018 to 2019 school year. So we see great increases across these states. These were the only states that we had data for both, but we see that there's a big increase, especially in North Carolina. Part of what happened there was that it became automated in PowerSchool. So previously schools had to go through and see who had met all the requirements or enter those data one by one, and now it's automated. So that's pretty neat. On the next slide, let's see. Here's just some interesting information on comparison of the policy characteristics. This comes from an article that Amy Heineke, Charlotte Hancock, and I just published in Foreign Language Annals maybe last month. And what you see here is that certain policy characteristics correspond to a higher or lower percentage of students earning the seal. So acceptance states that accept seat time, or that minimum GPA for world language proficiency, generally graduate a higher number of students with a seal of biliteracy. The lower the minimum required level of proficiency in the state, the higher percentage of seal earners that state produces in general. If states that will accept those measures of productive skills only, if there's not a test of all 4 domains, are graduating more Seal of Biliteracy earners. And then graduation or having a minimum GPA in English course of study instead of requiring like a minimum score in the SAT or ACT also results in a higher percentage of Seal recipients. So these data aren't really surprising, but it's interesting kind of to have the concrete evidence of that. We go to the next slide. I have about 4 more minutes. Here we go. What we see here are just some really neat innovations in Seal implementation in different places that I found that I think are interesting. So for example, in New Mexico, students can earn a Seal of Biliteracy through certification by Indigenous tribe. So for example, a lot of Indigenous languages might not have, a writing system, or you might not really be able to measure proficiency on actual scale because of characteristics of the language. So in that state, if the tribe says that a student is proficient, then that's good enough for the state and they award the seal. So that's, I think, really innovative. In Missouri, they've been gathering endorsements from different businesses in the state saying that, we recognize the Seal of Biliteracy, we know what it is, and we want bilingual, biliterate employees. So you can click on, if you were to go to that website, you could click on the different companies and see the letters they wrote. I love that because this is supposed to be a symbol to businesses and colleges of a student's, biliteracy. On the next slide, what we see, use in higher education. This is what I'm really excited about. More and more colleges and universities are awarding credit to students who earned a Seal of Biliteracy. This is required by legislation in Illinois and Minnesota. So in those states, all state colleges and universities are required to award credit to students who earned a seal. It's a great tool for recruiting language or students who are biliterate to a college or university. It's a great tool for making sure students are placed in the correct level of language at the higher ed level. And it's actually been shown to boost enrollment in some of the preliminary research we've done, because what happens is departments say, okay, to get your Seal of Biliteracy credits, you have to enroll in at least one world language course, and pass that course. And then once you do that, you get back credits or retroactive credits for all of for the Seal of Biliteracy, right? And so by that time, students are already halfway to a minor in the language. And so the enrollment in the minors and even majors is going up because students are saying, if I'm halfway there, I'm just going to take a few more classes, and get that major or minor. So that's really exciting. If we go to the next slide, just some examples. I already mentioned that there are other colleges and universities, as you can see in this list, that are voluntarily giving credit. I've heard UNC Pembroke gave credit this year in North Carolina. So far, that's the only one I've heard of in North Carolina, but I'm working on it. If we go to the next slide. Okay, here's kind of what I want to leave you with. In North Carolina, because students can earn Seal of Biliteracy through seat time, it's kind of an easy way out for some schools. Okay, we're going to give the Seal of Biliteracy to every student who took through level 4 of a language. But there's a lot of students in our schools in North Carolina that are proficient in a language not taught in school. And so what I really want to see happen is more and more schools offering students a stamp test or an Apple test or a language assessment in home languages so that they can also have access to the Seal of Biliteracy. So it's called, when we recognize only the bilingualism of kids who learned a language in school, that's called elite bilingualism, right? But we want to recognize the bilingualism of students who learned a language at home too, who may not be able to have or study that language in school, a circumstantial bilingualism. So it's really important that we also offer assessments or pathways toward the Global Languages Endorsement Seal of Biliteracy for those students. So if you go into to Education Week, you can see there's quite a few articles on that and the equity concerns around the Seal of Biliteracy. So that's something I want you to keep in mind. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to wrap this up. Amy Heineke and I have a book coming out with Actful next month. It's an implementation guide. It's all about how do I implement the Seal of Biliteracy in an equitable way so that all students have access. It's a 5 Ps framework that walks you through. It would be great for a professional learning community So keep your eye open for that. And then finally on Thursday night this week, next slide, I'm hosting a book club. If you're an Actful member, you can register at that link. And it's on a lot of the data that I showed you tonight. It's on an article that appeared in Foreign Language Annals, but it would be there's going to be breakout rooms and discussions. So if it's something you're interested in, you can sign up there if you're an Actful member, and join our book club. So I think what's next slide? Is there a next slide or am I done? Okay, perfect. Only 1 minute over my time. Thank you all so much. I'm going to hand it back.
And thank you, Kristin. We really enjoyed learning about all the research you've done about the Seal of Biliteracy across the country and right here in North Carolina. It looks like we're in pretty good shape as far as making our Seal of Biliteracy accessible to all of our graduating seniors, or as many as we can. And we've been doing a little work too on that as well to think more broadly about how we can ensure that students, for example, who come from different heritage language backgrounds, who maybe speak a different language at home, do have options to show that proficiency and earn the Seal of Biliteracy. And that's some of what we want to talk to you about in this next session, because we have some resources for implementing our state Seal of Biliteracy, the GLE, that you may have used already, or that you may want to explore further as you learn more about this and think about who amongst your students is earning the Seal of Biliteracy and how you can impact that in a positive way. So our first look is going to be at our GLE data. And as we said, we've had the GLE, or Seal of Biliteracy, in North Carolina since 2015. And we actually have a place on the website where you can go and see all of the data for your district or charter school since we began with a Seal of Biliteracy. We'll give you an overview from a statewide perspective just to get started. Some of you may have seen this chart before. This is where we sort of track from graduation year to year how many GLEs are earned, what percentage of our graduating class that is, and where we're seeing that in different parts of the state. Kristin kind of mentioned that our first 3 years of implementing the GLE were a little challenging because everything about the GLE, as far as meeting the requirements for English and a world language, had to be entered manually in PowerSchool. You can see, though, that we got off to a good start with a number of students each year, almost 1,000 each year, and sometimes many more than that, earning our Seal of Biliteracy and getting that information. Once the identification of students who'd earned the GLE and met those requirements was automated in PowerSchool, starting in 2018, our numbers went up to where we thought they should always have been. We had, as you can see, about 9% of our graduating class every year earning the Seal of Biliteracy, and quite a number of our districts and charter schools with high schools showing that they had GLE earners walking across the stage at graduation. Over time, as we've felt the impact of the pandemic and the challenges it's brought us, you can see that our numbers have changed a little bit, gone down a small amount, but also that it gives us an opportunity to think more about then how do we make sure as we come out of the situation and we truly are post-pandemic, how do we make sure that all of our students have access to options for the Seal of Biliteracy and earning that recognition at graduation? So we're going to do a little activity today where we want you to do a local data analysis based on what we've already showed you about our statewide information, but also in thinking about, again, locally how the GLE is impacting your students. So we want you to look at that GLE data over time for your district or charter school. And if you're from outside of North Carolina, of course, you can just choose a district or charter school that you would like to analyze, maybe similar to one in your state. But you choose one of these questions to answer and sort of analyze when you look at the data. You could look at how well are the students represented in the data for each class. So you know how large your graduating classes are at your high schools and what number of students you would expect to see in that data. You could also tackle the question, how well are our languages represented in the cumulative list since 2015? Because in this data, we actually have a place where you can see the languages that GLEs have been awarded in for each district or charter school. And don't forget, like we've been talking, that might be a world language that a student has decided to study and done particularly course completion work with, or It might be a heritage language that a student speaks or signs at home that they bring with them as part of their assets in the educational environment, and that they have taken an opportunity through the option, particularly the external testing option, to get that language recognized on their GLE. Another question to think about is, how well are we doing with the GLE compared to, for example, neighboring schools and districts, maybe ones of a similar size to us, or those with the same or different types of language programs or heritage language communities? And finally, which data is most surprising or interesting to you that you want to spend more time researching locally? So for example, you're going to see statewide numbers, but for each public school unit or PSU. But if you have multiple high schools, only you have access to that data locally to see at each high school how many graduates make up the total number for your district. So that might be something you want to look at or and think about in relation to the language programs or heritage communities within your district or charter school. So I'll pause for a moment because we want you to just choose one of these before we go on to our activity. All right, I hope you picked one question to focus on. Well, what we're going to do is have you go to the Seal of Biliteracy page, and we've got the link again there on the screen, but also I'm putting it into the chat box, and click on the spreadsheet that contains your PSU's information so that you can reflect on the question you chose. You see a screenshot there of where we have our GLE data 2015 to the present, and then links to information for either charter schools or districts. The reason we maintain two spreadsheets is because there's so much information, and so we don't want to be overwhelming with the spreadsheets. I'm going to go ahead and show you on screen how to do this, but of course you can click on the link in the chat as well and follow along from there. Here's our page about the Seal of Biliteracy, and we scroll down to where we have the GLE data, and then we can click on the charter school link or the district link. I'll choose the district, and you can see it comes up. Our districts and charter schools should be listed alphabetically, but sometimes they're sorted by LEA code. Of course, this is a spreadsheet that's view only, but you can download it if you need to and make a copy for yourself to do an analysis later on. Notice that we have starting just each class as we go through, and then at the end, after the class of 2021 data that's most recent, we have that cumulative list of languages per district or charter school that have been recognized with the GLE. All right, I'll let you go ahead and investigate the data for your district or charter school, and then we'll resume here in a minute or two to share the answers to the question we chose. All right, hopefully you found the information you need. We're going to do a waterfall in the chat. Some of you may have done that before, where we use the chat box for our activity. You may have heard it called flood the chat as well. I prefer waterfall because that gives a nice image of something beautiful happening in the chat box. So for waterfall in the chat box, you just type the letter of the question you chose to answer and analyze. And we have them printed here on the right-hand side of the screen, A through D, if you needed that again. If you did decide to add another question, you were ambitious today because it's 22222 and you picked two questions, you can type two letters. That's fine. And then once you type your letter, just go ahead and write in about 15 words or less your initial thoughts about what you found as far as the answers to the question that you selected. Then when I say the magic word of go, you'll click enter so that we can see a waterfall of responses with the question you chose and the initial thoughts that you had. So I'll pause for a moment. You can go ahead and start typing your answers, and then we'll do the waterfall here in a second. All right, please go ahead. We'll say go. Let's go and see the waterfall. What question did you choose? And what information did you gather in this short time we've been looking at the spreadsheets? All right, please take a look. We're starting to see some answers come out about people wanting to investigate further to see how their district numbers break down into subgroups and how they could impact more students. We also have someone who chose A, saying they noticed that the number of students in the district they chose increased every year, which is fantastic. And then there's no specific data on how students are represented. It's always a good question and one that you can research locally to see which high school students are coming from, which languages in particular they've been recognized, maybe the number of students for each language. And then also take a look at that, community around them. Is that what you would have expected with the languages and the numbers and so forth? So if you have a lot of heritage languages, for instance, is that happening? All right. Well, thank you so much. And again, there's much to investigate here, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ivana to talk about celebrating GLE earners.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are so excited to celebrate our GLE learners. And when you go to the next slide, I'll tell you when to do the clicking. So if you'll just wait for one moment. So celebrating our GLE learners in North Carolina and all around the country, there is a Seal of Biliteracy report that is put together each year. And as Anne-Marie mentioned, we are doing some things behind the scene to look at ways to make the GLE even more accessible for all of our students. And part of that came out of working with this data and providing the data at the national level. When you look at the map below, right now, I believe Dr. Davin said 45. I think it's what I saw on the site was 44 plus the District of Columbia have signed on to the Seal of Biliteracy. So before we click, I'm going to ask you to type in the chat box what number out of those 44 or 45 do you think North Carolina was in signing on as a participant in the Seal of Biliteracy, our GLE? What number out of that 44? Do you think we were 44th? Do you think we were first? Let me see some numbers in the chat box. People being shy. 7th. All right, you're close. 11th. Close, but just went over. So go ahead and click. So North Carolina was the 10th to establish the Seal of Biliteracy out of those 44. So we're very honored and excited to be an early adopter of the Seal of Biliteracy in 2015, as we have talked about in the past. And one more click, North Carolina is annually in the top 5 states as far as the number, not percentage, but number of students that earn the Seal of Biliteracy. So once again, let's see if we have some types in the chat box. Who do you think the #1 state is for getting the Seal of Biliteracy? Hint, we talked earlier about where the Seal of Biliteracy started. So I know, there we go, California. Okay, so where do you think North Carolina comes in that #5? So if California is #1, go ahead and click one more time, Anne-Marie, for California. If California is #1, where in that 5 do you think North Carolina comes in? I see 3rd, I see 2nd. Go ahead and click it a few more times to get all 5 of our answers. North Carolina for 2019 was second as far as the number of seals of biliteracy that were distributed to our students. So we are very excited, but we know that there are still many schools, and even though it's automated, there are many schools that aren't really aware of the process. As Dr. Davin talked about, the ways we can encourage our students, especially our heritage speakers, moving toward getting this seal. So although our numbers are high for the country, we would love to see them even higher. So on the next slide, you see some information again about our GLE. So the including the world languages and the proficiency levels on the actual diploma. So the diploma tells what language you received it in. It tells what level. As we mentioned, there were 3 languages that received higher than intermediate low. And so those diploma endorsements, the seals, can be done in several different ways. You can actually purchase the seals. I believe it's only $5 for approximately, I think 60 some. I'm not good at my memory, 63 seals for $5 that you can get the seals to actually place on the diplomas, but you can also, by following the guidelines that are provided in the specifications document from DPI, you can also even print those seals directly onto a diploma. So, you know, just thinking about how we celebrate our students by making sure they have this opportunity to see and to be rewarded, but to have it actually on their diploma when they receive that. Another way, if you'll click again, that we can celebrate our students is by adding the GLE to the school report cards. So we know that the school report cards are something that many people in the community look at. And so on the Career Ready tab, along with the other high school diploma endorsements, the GLE will be added. If you click again, there's a couple of screenshots that show what you would be looking for in that report card area. So there's a graph that shows you the percentage of students that earn each of the different diploma endorsements, each of those 5 endorsements in North Carolina. So let's drill down a little bit more on the next slide of some ways that you can really take it home, really make it personal. So in addition to the way the state recognizes the GLE, districts and schools and charter schools and even communities can really recognize their students. So one way is through the graduation. So over on the right-hand side is a picture of the graduation a few years ago in Chatham County, where the co-valedictorians were GLE recipients. They were dual language immersion students, GLE recipients, and they really celebrated the dual language by giving their speech in 2 languages. Not only giving the speech in 2 languages, but sharing on the graduation program the fact that students have earned this particular award. Some schools also do chords for their seniors in graduation. So they have a specific chords just to show that they have earned the GLE. Also, an additional certification. You can see the certificate down below where it has the GLE symbol on it, the school symbol, and your name saying, hey, you have received the Seal of Biliteracy, a beautiful document to be able to frame and have in addition to your diploma. So those diplomas or those certificates can also be given during awards night, really rolling that into these other awards that students are receiving. And a number of our districts have done press releases and had the media come in and talk about the power of this Seal of Biliteracy, also having information on their websites. So there's so many different ways that people are really celebrating the accomplishment of their students, whether it be, again, at the school level, at the district level, or the community. It's so powerful. I love what Dr. Davin was talking about with businesses signing on and saying, we value this and this is important to us, with universities beginning to recognize it. So let's take it all the way to our schools and our communities and really acknowledge what our students are doing. So now is a chance for you to think about the different ways that you can recognize students who have earned the GLE. So go ahead and click. So the question is, how could your school recognize students who've earned the GLE? So you're going to type in the chat box for the waterfall again, based on celebrations that we've discussed or something that you want to add, shooting for that 15 words or less, explaining what it is that you would want to do to recognize your students. And if you can fit it in those 15 words, why this type of local recognition would work well. So just like with the one that Anne Marie did, one more click, When I give the magic word, you will type in the waterfall. So I'm going to be quiet for just a minute and let you type. Don't hit go yet. I mean, don't hit send yet. Just a few more seconds. I know even 15 words can take a while. Oh, we got some happy people. Okay, go. All right, we're seeing lots of things. People who like the award ceremony, putting the seal on the diploma, making sure that it sends the message of how valuable it is. The district issue a certificate. All right, so taking it from the school all the way up to the district, the graduation cords, awards nights. Oh, a pin. I like that idea. A pin to wear as well. Another one on the special cords, raising the awareness of the parents and the students. Absolutely, like was mentioned earlier, how realizing that the native language, the heritage language is important and really showing that off. And here's one that says some teachers organize an informal meal with the Seal of Biliteracy recipients. Fantastic. So hopefully you got some ideas from us and maybe even some additional ideas from each other on ways that we can truly celebrate our recipients of the GLE. All right, Anne-Marie, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on into some educational and policy information for the GLE, some of which you might know, but we want to make sure you know where some of these tools and resources are for your own use. The first is our CAS for World Languages self-paced Canvas course. CAS stands for Counselor Advising and Scheduling Tips for World Languages. And this is a course that's designed for school counselors and other educators, of course, to understand, first of all, our North Carolina world language programs, the course codes we use, the options students have for when they start a language and which levels are offered locally, best practices in offering and even scheduling world language courses, and resources. One of the things that's always important is how we advise students on language study that aligns with their future aspirations. For example, earning the GLE. And so in Module 8 of the Self-Paced Canvas course, you see that there's a real focus on students graduating career and college ready. There's several different sections that we go through and talk about scheduling best practices and so forth. There's a whole section on our Global Languages Endorsement, the Seal of Biliteracy, as well as planning for the future. One of the things that we're very proud of is that North Carolina was the first state to actually publish this kind of educational information, a whole course, just for counselors and others who advise students, because in the national research on the Seal of Biliteracy, we've discovered that people need to be educated about the importance of the Seal of Biliteracy. And when we say people, we're talking about educators like ourselves, but who work with students in different ways and may not have as complete of an understanding as we do of things like language learning in general, whether that's a world language or English. And so this is an opportunity to provide that. In addition, one thing we did, because we were able to put this together, and I worked quite closely with my school counseling colleague who's now retired, Cynthia Floyd, we made sure that this would be accessible to everyone. And so what we have done is our CAST course is available in home base for our North Carolina educators and Canvas Commons. So those outside of the state or in higher education or who want to take this course and not do it self-paced but do it instructor-led can access it. You can see there it's posted on the professional learning page on the NCDPI World Languages website, and you can go to it there. There's also instructions on how to enroll yourself in the home-based version in NESIS. In addition, the CDM process, which we mentioned as an option for showing that students have reached the intermediate low level of proficiency or higher to earn to complete the world language requirement for the GLE, also applies to other things. And so there was recently a Credit by Demonstrated Mastery Back to School memo that was released, and this had details and some additional guidance for world language courses when students are using the CDM process to get credit for that. One of the things it has was that students can demonstrate mastery of a world language by using a proficiency-based exam from our list of approved exams for the Seal of Biliteracy. And so I put that link in there as well, so you can go to that memo and get that information. Kristin and several others have mentioned that list of proficiency-based exams, which is aligned to our state standards. And I'm putting in the chat now a link to that list so that you can see what exams are available, which languages they are available in, and to think about that too, especially for your students who have proficiency in a less commonly taught language, or maybe a language not yet taught in K-12 that they may want to use for their world language requirement for the GLE. Also, please note that the GLE assessment list is regularly updated with additional assessments for more languages and guidance about score reports. Kind of what Kristin mentioned before about focusing on the productive skills in an assessment, which can be used particularly in less commonly taught languages to fulfill world language requirements for the GLE.
And I've got an eye on our time, and I want to make sure that Melissa has plenty of time to share with us about the student or the district perspective on the students earning the GLE. So I'm sure Anne Marie is going to put the link in the chat, but what I will say is that we have a great FAQ document, 19 different questions, things that we have heard most commonly from the field that we have put together our responses to. There is a bit.ly link. Please make sure you realize that with the bit.ly links, the capitalization is important, so the O is lowercase. And so when we looked at it earlier, when we looked at the screen earlier, you were able to see what the website looks like, and by scrolling down near the bottom or using that direct link. I'm going to go ahead and go to our activity so that we can make sure we have plenty of time for our guest speaker. So which GLE resources have you used or shared with your colleagues? Is it the CAST Canvas course, the CDM Back to School memo, FAQs, NCDPI approved external assessment list, maybe the World Language course codes, the Global Languages Endorsement user guide, or you're not sure yet? And for that user guide, please know that we will be making updates to that once we have made the changes to the requirements for the GLE. So we have had several questions about updates to that user guide, but once we have made our updates, we will update that guide as well. So the poll should be open. You should have the opportunity to pick any of these that you have already used. And if you haven't used them, be thinking about which ones you would like to use. We'll give it just a few more seconds. And let's go ahead and close that one out. The broadcast does go till 5:30, and we are going to have a wonderful wrap up to our session with Melissa Perez in just a moment. So a number of people have used the FAQs, the approved external exams, the world language course codes, and my favorite, not sure, but I'm making a note of these things for the future. All right. So I'm going to, at this time, turn it over to Melissa Perez, who is a K-12 Cultural and Linguistic Development Specialist in the Durham Public Schools. And we are so excited to hear from her today about the things that they are doing in the district. Melissa?
Thank you, Ivana. Thank you so much for your presentation. And thank you, Anne Marie, for inviting me to be a part. I am Melissa Perez, the Cultural and Linguistic Development Specialist, which is sort of a fancy way to say that I do all things world language, dual language immersion. I'm also a certified interpreter translator, and do a wealth of other things as well in terms of district celebrations, and also advocating particularly for our Latinx students. So I would like to talk to you a little bit about kind of the GLE in Durham Public Schools and kind of how I got started working with it, and how we kind of went through a process to help our numbers grow. So here's a look at Durham's Public Schools GLE data dating back to 2015. So we've spoken and we've heard other speakers talk about this afternoon about how when it first started, it was not automated, and that kind of had some difficulty. I was actually put on the committee in 2017. And as you can see, rather than having our numbers increase every year after we got started, we were kind of on a decline, which was not good. So we kind of got a group together and said, okay, so what are we going to do about this? How are we going to approach this and help our numbers grow. So as you can see, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that process in a moment, but you can see the numbers grew in 2018. It grew again, excuse me, in 2019. And then, of course, in 2020 and 21, we definitely can see the effects of the pandemic in our data. So in looking to, if we could go to the next slide, please. So until, as I said, until 2018, it fell under someone else. And that was kind of where I picked up. And we noticed that our IB and AP programs definitely contribute significantly to our GLE numbers. And when we looked at the data, we saw that a lot of our GLE students come from those programs. However, the majority of our numbers do come by way of taking 4 years of a language. And so we definitely felt like that the word is not getting out of there, like we need more promotion, more marketing, if you will, and highlighting awareness. And one of our key ways in being able to do that was through events with our IB programs and our AP programs with our students and our parents to talk about GLE and make students aware, because as we know, with those programs, that after the second year of the world language, it's an honors course, and then moving up to like AP, whether it be Spanish, French, or whatever. And of course, again, the pandemic effect on numbers was not just seen in Durham Public Schools, but we can also see that across the board at the state level as well. So we started in growing our numbers. How can we do this? What is our plan? So we kind of decided we needed some more promotion or marketing and to be really strategic to be able to do that with our families and with our schools, because what we were finding was a lot of our teachers and even administrators were not really clear, like, what is the GLE and what is the Seal of Biliteracy? And they thought like it's kind of the two different things, and like really providing some clarification around that, really taking advantage of things like AP Family Night, school open houses, school newsletters, family course guides, using Canvas announcements, because we are a Canvas district in terms of our LMS. Having time, sort of, it's particularly at the beginning of the school year where district meets with counselors, for example, when they meet with APs, when they meet with principals and department chairs, and having that as part of those presentations and having those conversations at that time, so that everyone is aware that, number one, that it's available and what it takes to earn it. And that way, particularly those folks who work closely with students and student scheduling and things like counselors play a critical part in this. And so after we started doing those things, we continued to look at our data and our numbers, and we were like, something is missing. Something is still wrong. Because when we look at the subgroups of our data, what we noticed were a lot, or I would say the majority of our students that are graduating with the GLE are white students. Now, if you look at our district data, Durham Public Schools student data shows that the majority of our students are students of color, are Black and brown students. So how is it possible that our GLE numbers are not reflective of our student population? That's a problem. There's something wrong with that. So not just because of the GLE, but we were noticing that in the enrollment in our upper level classes in general. So this was not just a world language thing, this was, or a GLE thing, this was across content areas. So we really began a district data analysis in all of our content areas and looking at our students who the data says are furthest from justice and need the most supports. And in Durham Public Schools, I can tell you that those first and foremost are our EL students. And the second one on that list is our Black male students. And what we were noticing when we were looking at our enrollment in our upper level honors and AP courses, languages across content areas across the board, that again, that those classes rosters do not reflect our student population of Durham Public Schools. Again, problematic. So we started digging through that. And why is that the case? Well, it wasn't because that they didn't meet some sort of prerequisite. They did. But we really looked at and found out that a lot of assumptions were being made because of a middle school that you came from, that you may or may not be able to do something. Or in a lot of cases, because there wasn't an awareness out there, they just placed students wherever they thought they needed to be, or a student wouldn't necessarily sign up for that honors course. They just went ahead to that regular course. And what really sort of was heartbreaking to me was some conversations that we actually had with students, and we're like, so, did you know that this was an option? Yeah, I knew about it. Well, why wouldn't you want to try to be in the honors course and try to get that honors credit or those upper level courses and in your world language, for example, and try to earn the GLE and graduate with that, on your diploma? And a lot of students said, I don't want to be the only student of color in that class, or teachers, like representation in staff and faculty is not there, and I don't feel comfortable. And so we had to really go back and look at strategic scheduling and how we were going to do that. And so even though, yes, it takes the time to sit down and have those conversations with students, it was well worth it, because we learned that there was a lack of awareness. So we were able to kind of begin that work there and just say, you know what, or they were afraid it was going to be too hard for them. And no, you can do it. We have these supports in place for you. We want to see you succeed. We want to help you with this. We're going to provide you with these supports, so that they would sort of take that plunge and go on and keep up their language study to be able to work toward the GLE. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of knowledge about something that I'm currently working on. Of course, we're always trying to grow our numbers in GLE. And so that led me to a reflection about our credit by demonstrated mastery rules and protocols as well, and kind of the connection. And I think Dr. Davin and some of you have spoken to this already a little bit today, and how they can connect. And a student, especially a EL student, which, as I previously mentioned, is like the top, according to our data, the students that need the most supports in this district. And the way our CDM process was set up was that we would only offer a credit by demonstrated mastery in a language that is physically taught here in Durham Public Schools. Well, we have a ton of EL students, and while a lot of them are Spanish speaking, there are a lot of languages other than Spanish that are native languages of our EL students. So the current assessment that we are using for the CDM process is called the APPLE. It's a great proficiency-based test. I don't have any complaints about it, other than it only offers it in 10 languages. Well, then the situation came about, right? About this student. This particular high school student is in a class trying to take French when their native language is Vietnamese. And this student is struggling, like is a great student, has great grades other than language, like just really, really struggling. And I'm sitting here thinking, there was a request brought forward from the school to the district level about this student wondering, could they take the CDM and get credit for Vietnamese? Well, with the current process, that wasn't possible, because we only offer that for something that is taught. And we, unfortunately, in Durham Public Schools don't offer Vietnamese physically in our schools. So that really prompted me to think. I've often felt like we've kind of missed the mark with our EL students and them having an awareness of the GLE, and also kind of knowing what they need to do to be able to get there, and like the assessment list. And so again, through the marketing and promotion, we've definitely tried to share those things, but just really feeling like we're missing the mark with our EL students and being able to achieve the GLE. And so I started thinking about this, and I said, well, why can't we just change the rule? Why does it have to be stuff that we only offer if we can have a state approved proficiency assessment that would be able to use to assess these students and be able to show the intermediate proficiency for the GLE. And then on top of that, I thought, well, what other assessments are out there other than the Apple? Is there something that could offer even more languages than the Apple does? And so I gathered with my state PLC and my fantastic 4 colleagues, and they're the world language coordinators like myself across the state. And I started asking questions. Well, what do you all do? Or what is your policy? Or how does it work for you? And what do you do with your ELs? And trying to encourage them to get the GLE and get supports can you provide them? And so I started to do some research around the STAMP assessment by Avant and learned that the STAMP assessment offers over like 18 languages that it's possible to offer a proficiency assessment in. And so I'm like, well, instead of using the Apple, why don't we use the STAMP? Because then we open up the door for even more of our English language learners to be able to get language credit and sort of start paving this way to be able to get the GLE. Like, why wouldn't we do that for our students? So I started pulling together people. I started pulling together the district people over advanced academics, the people over all the counselors in the district. And we started having these conversations, and I showed them examples of the STAMP, and I showed them examples of the Apple, and kind of like how we can make this work. And so that's kind of where we are currently. And we are planning, because cost-wise, the cost per student for an Apple and a STAMP is comparable, right? It's about the same thing. It's very inexpensive. So so the worry was, of course, we always face challenges. We want to definitely have more awareness in marketing, and we talked about some ways to be able to do that. But also costs. So if we're going to open it up like this to all these languages, are we going to have like an influx and have like all these students want to get the GLE through the CDM? And what is the cost going to look like? And I'm like, well, if we're supporting our students, there's money out there. We'll find the money. I'm sure that we'll get the money. So that's not a big idea or a big problem. So we just need to do what's best for students and do what's best for these students who are at the top of our data, who need the most supports. Why would we not pave that way for them? And so that is what we are currently doing, and we are currently putting this into place. This is like live off the press, to be able to change the rules here in Durham to be able to support our ELs, which our data shows should be our top priority. And so hopefully in the future, I'll have further updates about how well this is going, but that's where we are for now. And if anybody has any questions or anything, if you put them in the chat, I'll happily address them. Otherwise, at this time, I will turn it back over to Anne-Marie.
Thanks so much, Melissa, for sharing this perspective from your district on how you really analyzed your data, just like we were doing in our activity before, looking at our district data, our charter school data, and saying, what does this tell us about serving students? And, you know, hearing your story about how you've taken a state policy and really looked closely at the students in your district and how they're being impacted is so important for all of us. So thank you for sharing that. I also see there's a couple of comments, no questions yet, but comments in the chat as well related to what you were sharing about with representation in our world language courses for our students. Right. Well, we're also conscious of the time, so we're going to roll over here into our wrap up and reminders.
Well, we really hope that you enjoyed your time with us this afternoon, and thank you so much to our guest speakers for sharing your expertise and your experiences with us today. All the information regarding the GLE is actually shared on our listservs, and we suggest signing up for the following listservs that you see here. So you can sign up for these listservs by visiting that link that you see there and entering your email address. You'll be able to select all of those listserv titles that you see there. We'll also put the link in the chat for you if you want to go ahead and sign up for that. In terms of CEU certificates, as you know, DPI doesn't issue CEUs. However, we do send certificates of attendance approximately 1 week from today. After this webinar, you should get one. And that certificate would then need to be presented to your local district or your school to earn your CEUs. And then, of course, if you have any questions, please always feel free to reach out to the GLE team there. Our emails and our phone numbers are listed there. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. And we really hope that you enjoyed the guest speakers as well as the information that Anne Marie and Ivana shared with you today.